Hi everyone, today we're going to be designing a coloring page together. So you can use these coloring pages as free downloads, you can sell them as packs, you could create a whole book of coloring pages, you could make a beautiful collection of coloring pages and publish those on something like Amazon KDP. There are so many different ways to use these pages, even locally. You could do a page of your favorite local shop or your church or your school, something fun to share with your friends and family or something to sell online. So let's dive into this project. So I'm going to start out here in Procreate, press the plus symbol, new canvas, go to inches as my measurement and 8.5 by 11. The reason I'm working at that size is because I'm guessing that if I gave this away as a freebie or, printed this out for people, they'd want it on a standard paper size. You can work at any size you want here, obviously, but I do find that when you're planning on disseminating something like this, it's typically nice to have it on a regular sheet of paper size. I'm grabbing the sketching pencil from the Everything Bagel brush set, which you can get right below this video, and I'm selecting a color that I like, and let's go grab a reference image. I'll be pulling from my Flickr gallery called Vintage Objects, and if you sign up for the Everything Bagel brush set, you'll get a link to my Flickr galleries so that you can pull from my galleries as well. Totally up to you. Use whatever image you want, obviously. I am thinking vintage roller skate today. That's kind of what I'm in the mood for. So I'm going to be using a vintage roller skate, and then I think I'm just going to put some fun flowers behind it. So there's my roller skate. Back to my page. Pull that menu bar up, pull Chrome over to the left, or if you want to go offline, you can screenshot, and then you just have like an offline reference image, which can be nice sometimes. And I'm going to go through my sketching process for anyone who feels like they can't draw. I hear people say all the time, I can't draw. That just means you don't have a process for drawing. So everybody can draw. It is a process to be learned, not a magical skill that some people have and some people don't. And the main thing to remember is that you start big and work your way out. So this is the rough outer shape of this roller skate. I'm going to tap the move tool and make it smaller. You can turn off snapping if you want it to be a little easier to move. And I'm putting that right in the center because I think I'm just going to put some little cute flowers around it. And just keeping an eye on general proportions. This is not where I'm trying to make things perfect. This is literally, I'm just trying to figure out where is this going to go on the page? What parts are there to the various shapes of this object, and then I'll just reduce the opacity of that and create a new layer. Now that I've got a rough sketch layer, it's really easy to go through and refine it. So if you don't start with a rough sketch layer, you might find yourself struggling to get that initial shape down, and that's what I see with a lot of beginners. They're like, I just don't know even where to start with sketching. And I would say pretty much always want to start with some geometric shapes. So we're thinking about the shoe size here. I'm just going with like a 8.5. Doesn't really matter. We're just trying to get a cute little roller skate shape. And I'm not copying this exactly. I mean, this is a brand. I'm not going to copy this brand. I'm going to take some inspiration from it. Like, I think some little stripes would be cute here. And making sure my laces go across here, cross, 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 and flat. I think that's another thing that people new to drawing make the mistake of doing when they first start is they look at their drawing all the time. Rather than looking at your drawing so much, look at your reference image a lot more, because your reference image is going to tell you what to draw. And the more you do that, you train your eye and hand to get better at judging an object. And, you know, if you're going for like interesting and not just perfect, then take your time here to build an interesting, weird illustration, you know. It's not necessarily the goal to make a perfect roller skate. The goal here is to make an interesting composition. So one thing I'm seeing is my whole situation on the bottom feels a little thick. So I'm grabbing the freehand selection tool, selecting that whole bottom. And what happens if I just, you know, this is too skinny, that's too big. So I'm looking for somewhere in the middle. Something like that, perhaps. So that's how I just kind of refine my shapes over time. I'm going to do the same thing with my wheels. I feel like my wheels can go back a little and get a little bit smaller, something like that. I don't want to go too small because then it starts reading as like a vintage roller skates. They had those vintage roller skates that were a little bit smaller, so. All right, that looks cute. So I'm going to do my final sketch now. And I sketch in layers like this because I like to know what my overall base is going to be before I do anything final. So this is my overall shape. And then I'm going to be adding details to it as we work. So we've got this rubber sole thing. It's not quite that wavy, it's more flat. And these are things you learn as you work on a drawing. You know, I don't know everything about roller skates, but as an artist or illustrator, it's our job to learn an object and to understand the parts of the object that are essential to it. And that's what helps people understand what in the world is this thing. So we've got some thick laces that cross over each other. Each layer of sketch you'll notice here is like a little bit thicker than the previous one. And that just allows me to understand the thickness and how this is going to look when it's inked. Always keeping in mind here, this is a coloring page and I need places that are kind of cordoned off for coloring. So keep that in mind as you draw all of these parts. You know, a lot of people at this point would use quicklime and draw that circle and hold it down to get a perfect circle. You can do that. If you want that perfect look and feel, go ahead and do that. But if you want a more loose, fun feel, which this is more my style, then just draw it by hand and let it be a little bit funky, a little bit weird. And that's going to give your composition more character. I think with all the digital art and AI and everything, we've got plenty of perfect art out there, you guys. We don't need more perfect art. We need more fun and funky and weird art. So go ahead and feel free to do that if that is your style. I think that's what people are craving with all this AI stuff and digital stuff. They want real. They want funky and weird and unusual. These stripes are going to be fun for somebody to color, so that's why I'm doing these. Oh, could we just go all the way with the stripes? That's almost too much. I like 4. I think 4 is a good happy medium. So as I'm drawing this, I'm thinking about where am I going to cordon this off? That's going to be a space. This is going to be a space. Let's do yet another circle here like that. This is a space. This is a space. So I'm giving my coloring person, whoever's going to color this, a lot of spots to color. Downsize this just a smidge. And now I'm going to put some flowers around it just for funsies. So let's start with some vines. Using this vine to break up the space a little bit to make it just a little bit more interesting. This is going to be fun to color, so I'm trying to make a interesting composition that someone's going to feel joy when they color it, and just have fun. You know, it's like if it's really predictable and redundant, they're going to be like, me. I've done something like that before, not interested. But if it's a really unusual, fun illustration, they're going to get excited and like, ooh, I want to color that. So that's that feeling we're trying to create with these. Whether you want to sell these, whether you want to give these away as free downloads, always thinking about how could I do this a little bit differently than I've done before or than I've seen someone else do before to make it unique. So starting with those geometric shapes, lines and circles, you guys, that is the basis of every drawing, lines and circles. And if you start with that, you're building a much more interesting composition that allows your adult coloring book page users to play. So whatever shape you want to give them here, I think we should give them a rose, maybe. Roller skates and roses, baby. That's going to be the title of this. Every piece I draw is a potential area to be colored. So they could color these roses, each petal as a separate piece if they wanted to. And so I'm cordoning off each of these places. And I draw fast, you guys, because that is what leads to more interesting shapes. If you go really slow, you're going to be second guessing yourself. You're going to be saying, oh, that's not how that should look. I'm doing it wrong. Whereas if you pick it up a little bit, pick up the pace, you're forced to make some messy lines. And people like messy. It makes them happy. Let's do one or two just little, almost like a bud, and I'm going to do some buds. Let's just do like one or two buds. One there. Where do we not have an interesting little shape? Right here. Okay. So there's our flowers, new color, new layer, and leaves. Do we want to break up the leaves even more? I think so. That's one thing about designing a coloring page is like it becomes your job to make interesting spaces for people. So you've got to work to make it interesting. Let's start with what are these called? Stems. Yep. So I've got some stems coming out. And then I'm just going to fill this with leaves. And, you know, the newer you are to drawing and sketching, I think the more layers you should use for your drawing and sketching. Like if you just started, take your time here. Do 3 or 4 layers of sketching before you commit to your final. But as you get more and more comfortable with drawing, you can certainly just dive right in to this part of the process where you're drawing these leaf shapes. Aren't those cute? So I'm just going to repeat the same process until all of these areas are completely filled up with some kind of fun lines. So my last step here is to do a little bit more overlapping with the roller skate. So at this point, we've got everything behind the roller skate, but I'm thinking it's going to be a lot more interesting if some things just kind of peek onto the roller skate here. And I don't want to cover up anything that's, too important to the composition of the roller skate, but a little leaf here and there, I think, is really going to add quite a bit of visual interest to this whole composition. So that's my last step here, to integrate this whole thing into one piece. And then we can go through and ink. So I'm just going to reduce the opacity of all my sketches and make anything invisible that I don't really need to see, which would be like the original first sketches I did. Create a new layer. Get pure black as my color by double tapping in that black layer. I do think it's important here to use that pure black. And then grab a brush you like. I'm going to be using the Fluid Ink brush from my Everything Big Old Brush set. And again, you can get that by clicking the link right below this video. All my inking is going to be done on the same layer. So I'm just going to start diving into this. And of course, at this point, you need to take some time to figure out the thickness of your line and the style that you're going to use to ink. So are you going to do a solid line like that? Or do you want to add some fluidity to it? This brush allows you to do either one. If you want to do solid, just set it to the size you like and keep the same pressure as you ink. Whereas if you want some fluidity, turn it up a little bit, and then you can get that fluid line. So take a minute here to think about, what do you want this to look like in the end? And then before you make that final decision, zoom out, because it may look really good close up like this. And then you zoom out and you're like, oh, you almost can't even see that. So this is where we're going to decide how thick to make that line. So I'm going to zoom to right here and just slowly bump up that sizing until that looks good. So I'm going with this line here. This one felt a little thick. This one feels much better to me. So this is a style thing. There's no, I can't tell you, put it on 7%, because it's going to depend on your style. And now, as I'm inking, I'm really thinking about my end user and a few things I want to avoid. Number one, stopping just short of a line. We don't want to leave them with a trap here, like, well, now I can't fill that space. Stopping short of a line with like a thinner part, so it just looks a little bit unfinished. A big blob at the beginning like that. So I'm really focusing on coming in smoothly and ending smoothly, and giving them an interesting space to work with. So if I back it up all the way here, I can make this whole thing a little bit more wavy and interesting, rather than just going burp. That's a little bit boring, right? So I'm going to take a lot of time here to think about my end user and make them an interesting space to work with, not just closed spaces, but interesting spaces. So this is the part you should definitely take the most time on, right? Because this is what the person's going to use to decide if they should buy, or if it's just a free download, if they should enter their email or not, or, however you're using this, it is important to get your user to care about this drawing. So that's where we're going to take a lot of time here to make it cool and pretty. So I'm going to do that and speed up my camera here, but I'm just repeating the same process over and over. And you all can do the same along with me. I want to point out one thing I'm also avoiding, which would be to make them a really tiny space. I don't like that little sliver of a space. It leaves them with the feeling of, how do I even fill that? So I'm being very aware of what kind of issues they're going to run into as they're coloring so that they feel really confident as they come in with color. So I'm all done inking this, but there's one last thing I do recommend doing, which is going through and just checking all of your lines, especially if you're listening to a podcast or music or something. As you do this, it can get easy to not fully complete some of these or just leave some little kind of weird looking edges. So I'm going to make my sketch invisible so you can't see anything but the black and white, and then just take some time to go through and refine all of these. You may need to erase a little bit, but just going through that little extra step of just making everything super smooth and pretty, it really does make a difference for your end user. It just makes it that much more enjoyable to work with. So of course, once you're done with that, if you're going to give this away as a freebie, I would definitely recommend putting down here maybe your website or your social media handle or something to identify the maker, so that of course you don't necessarily want this distributed or given away without your permission. But I want to note a few things that make this composition fun that I would keep an eye on as you create one of these. And that is having some interesting negative spaces. So it's okay to have negative spaces like this and not fully fill up the page. In fact, it makes for a more interesting composition. So don't feel like you have to fill every square inch. I think it's better to leave some fun spaces like that so that the user has some, more interesting visuals as they work. And of course, there's going to be spots that aren't perfect. So this is a good time to step back, look at how I forgot some of these veins, or some of these places are just a little bit rough and need to be smoothed out. So I'm not going to make you all watch me do that because it's, a longer process and I'll take my time, but this baby's ready to go. You could just share, save as a JPEG, save it, or save it as a PDF, however you want to distribute this. And of course, this is a good time to do a whole series. Why not do like a roller skate series or vintage object series so that you could give those away as an awesome pack? So I hope you all enjoyed this tutorial. I would absolutely love to see your coloring book pages. So please share these with me. You can tag me on social media at Liz Kohler Brown. Next, it's question time. We have a question from Gail Poll 30. Gail says, where do you get your cards printed and how expensive is it? Gail, I believe you are talking about my greeting cards that I hand letter in Procreate. I like to get these printed at drop shipping companies. So I have a few different companies that I use, and it depends on the card and the season. And I have a link right below to share that information with you all, since I know a lot of you are going to be curious about designing greeting cards. How do you design one? How do you get it printed? Where do you get it printed? All of those things. I've done a lot of trial and error over the years and figured out a system that works really well for me and doesn't involve any shipping on my part. I literally just design the cards, list them on Etsy, and a drop shipping company does all of the fulfillment for me. So if that's something you're interested, check out the link below this video and you can learn how to do that. So I'll see you all in the next iPad art break. Remember to subscribe if you want to get more tutorials like this in your notifications, and leave a comment if you have some special requests for some projects you'd like to do with me in the future. I'll see you there. Bye.